So Forest are in major trouble when it comes to PSR. But what is the breakdown of it? How does this all work? And why is everyone talking about Hudson-Odoi Murillo and Morgan Gibbs-White? These are the kind of headlines we've been seeing. Good morning, good evening, or good night. Hope you guys are doing well, and welcome to this special PSR, probably a two-part episode on Forest and the trouble they are facing when it comes to a potential second breach. If you're enjoying the content, please don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to Forest Fan TV if you are new here. It's completely free to do, and a third of you watching this right now are not subscribed, so hit that button there and go get your tickets for this LED signed framed throwback Forest kit from last season, signed by the likes of Cooper, Lingard, Jono, Morgan Gibbs-White and Yatesy. The link's pinned in the comments below. Okay, let's get into this video. And this is probably going to be a bit more of a serious one. I'll chuck the odd old dad joke in there as well. But I really want everyone to come to a level playing field on the understanding of where Forest are on PSR. And what we're going to do in this episode is explain the valuations of the players, how it's worked out, and which players and why are being talked about in the media, and why are some others being ignored, the deadwood, the fringe players, whatever phrase you want to use for them. So there's going to be some phrases in here, these new buzzwords that are coming up in today's kind of football terminology. Amortisation is the key one, and we'll be talking a lot about that, and I'll be explaining it to you in layman's terms so you can understand it. And then from that, we'll be able to advance this on so that we can understand the valuation of the Forest players and why potentially selling someone like an Emmanuel Dennis may not be worth it, and selling or getting rid of a Sangare, as some people want to do, would cost Forest money. And these are the kind of topics we need to cover off. And then we'll talk about, probably in part two, Forest's current financial situation and how this is all impacting it. Hope you're still with me. So let's jump into this. And let's start by actually defining amortisation, if that's even how you pronounce the annoying word. And let me tell you it in a layman's perspective. Okay, so let's give you a brief explanation of amortisation and how it works. So let's put an example of player A. He's been purchased for 100 million on a 5-year contract. To work out the annual amortisation, what you need to do is take the value that the player was bought for, divide it by the length of years in the contract, and that will give you your annual amortisation, which in this example would be 20 million. Now, let's say that player played for that club for 2 years. To figure out how much is left in terms of the club's obligation on amortisation, you would have to take the remainder of the contract and times that by the annual amortisation. So in this example, 20 million, which we figured out, 100 divided by 5, times the 3 years left would give you 60 million. And basically what that will mean is for the player to be sold for a profit for the club, they have to sell that player for over 60 million. If they were to sell that player for any less than that, it would go down as a negative PSR value on the PSR sheet. Now, potentially, if you look at that example, if after 2 years they sold the player for 70 million, technically speaking, the club made a 30 million pound loss. But on the PSR numbers, that would be a 10 million pound PSR profit because of the amortisation. Does that make sense to you guys? Let me try and put that into a specific Forest example So that will maybe make it a bit clearer. Hopefully you're staying with me on this one. So let's have a look at the example of Morgan Gibbs White's amortisation. Now, Forest purchased him for about 35 million on a 5-year contract. Now, let's not get into the nitty gritty. We believe it was 25 million, and then there's been add-ons in terms of what we owed Wolves for objectives completed, etc. But for the ease of all of this, let's call it 35 million that's been currently paid on a 5-year contract. Now, if we look at how much he's worth with his amortization annually, 35 divided by the length of his contract would give us a fee at Forest of 7 million for his annual amortization. He still has 3 years left on his contract. Therefore, if Forest were to sell Morgan Gibbs White this summer, anything over £21 million would class as profit for him and profit on PSI. So again, you can look at this example, and if Forest were to sell Morgan Gibbs White for 22 million, even though that would be a loss of, over £10 million, technically PSR wise, that would be £1 million profit. And that is why when we're seeing some of the Morgan Gibbs White stories, for example, when we're talking about 60 million there, it's nearly 40 million in terms of profit that Forest would receive. So I hope that example kind of makes it clear. And this is the kind of mindset we need to start getting into. I've been, guilty of it myself, where I've sat there and said, oh, we've bought Lewis O'Brien for 8 million. If we were to sell him now for 6 million and Forest are whatever they are behind the PSR, we'll just chunk all that 6 million off. No, it doesn't work like that. Because let me give you another example here of a fringe player or a deadwood player or a player that's out of the squad in Emmanuel Dennis. And let me show you how his stats compare up to Morgan Gibbs White. Okay, so with Emmanuel Dennis, again, the fee roughly is 10 million on a 4-year contract. If we amortize that amount by the 4 years, we get 2.5 million for each year, his annual amortization. Now, with 2 years left on his contract, Forest would need to sell him for over £5 million to obtain any profit on Emmanuel Dennis. The problem we have is that his market valuation right now is somewhere between 5 and 7 million at a push. So if Forest were to sell Emmanuel Dennis for 5 million, they would make no PSR profit and no dent into the deficit that we currently have. If we were to sell him for 4 million, then we would lose $1 million on the PSR. So if the PSR is, let's just call it 20 million for now, then Forest would now owe 21 million on PSR. That's why it's important that we all as a fan base understand this amortization and the impact of it. Now, it's more complicated than that because you have to take into account things like salaries, which go onto it, add-ons like we had with Morgan Gibbs White, for example. All these will have an impact on the amortization. But just for the sake of this video and just to give us all a ground level understanding of amortization, we're just going to keep it that simple. And please don't put in the comments, actually, Dennis cost us 10.5 million, blah, blah, blah. I was just showing you as an example. Those figures were not exactly to the penny, but they are roughly the correctly reported numbers. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Let me know if you did understand amortization before this video. I probably just wasted your time. Or have you found that section of the video useful? Let me know in the comments down below. Okay, so what we clearly wanted to show in this video, and the point of part 1, if you like, is basically that Forest cannot make up this deficit just by selling the quote-unquote deadwood and the fringe players in the team. If you look throughout the squad, and we have done, the best amount of profit you're going to get is something like £1 million or £2 million. If you look at the likes of Matt Turner, who probably the majority of the fan base wouldn't shed a tear about if he left, it's probably going to cost us between -1 million and 2 million, depending on what Forest gets. And we will talk about in part 2 how much Forest deficit is, and we'll talk about how Forest can get to that magic number before June the 30th and make sure that we don't get any points deductions. But what I will prepare you for in part 2 is to do that And the reason you are seeing all these newspapers and mainstream media and things talking about Murillo, Callum Hudson-Odoi and Morgan Gibbs-White is because they are correct in their assessment on how Forest will get to this deficit, but doesn't need one, doesn't need two, doesn't need three. We will cover that off in part 2, which should be out on Monday. And if you're watching this on Monday, just click on to the next video. Yeah, anyway, so hopefully that's been informative for you. I'm sorry it's a little more serious than normal, but this is a serious topic about Forest and potentially the future they have. And don't forget, we're not alone in this, is something else I would say. You got the likes of Villa, who are struggling with PSR. You got Leicester, who've come up, that are probably getting points reduction. Everton in the same boat, Newcastle, and there's one or two other clubs as well. But we need to understand this so that you guys are informed when we start to see the movement of the players in the next couple of weeks. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you tune in for part 2. Please do hit that like button. Subscribe to Forest Fan TV if you are new. And let me know in the comments if this kind of information has been useful for you or not. Or do you just want transfer videos every day? We'll see you on Beat the Drop on Sunday. Yes, it's back. Breaking news. Come on, you Reds.